safe to say my week has been absolutely ruined because of this. I'm going to apologise in advance to everyone who's seen my rather childish reactions on Twitter. The simple reason is just that's in my personality. That is not going to change. And to anyone who says about the stupid Arsenal logo, that was in here when I moved into this house, okay? Just let it drop, for goodness sake. So obviously the big news is that Steve McClaren has been sacked as Newcastle manager, unfortunately, and rather even more unfortunately, Rafa Benitez has been appointed as their new manager for the next 3 years or so. But obviously I think there's an option out clause if Newcastle get relegated, so please let that clause be in effect. I'll quickly get this out of the way now. Please God, touch wood as well. You can see the wood here. It's all over the place. There we go. Let Sunderland get at least a draw, if not a win, in the derby, and let Sunderland stay up. Right, I've done that praying bit out of the way. Let's get it done. So obviously, McClaren's been sacked. Benitez has been appointed. There's a few interesting points I wanted to quickly go through, though, because obviously I predominantly do Sunderland videos because I'm a Sunderland fan. But obviously, given that Newcastle have been in a relegation battle with us this season, I've wanted to genuinely talk about what's been going on at St James's Park, primarily because Newcastle have been down there with us. If Newcastle win 8th or 10th or whatever, which is where as a club they should be, I wouldn't be too fussed because it doesn't affect Sunderland, apart from the fact we play them. But now I'm really worried about staying up. But there's a few points I wanted to talk about. First of all, right. Let's look at when Steve McClaren came in. I said from the start, when Newcastle got Steve McClaren, he was not going to be the person for them. He was not going to be the person who was going to bring success to St James's Park. And Mike Ashley, whatever that interview he did at the end of last season, which in my opinion he only did just to save his own skin effectively. It was basically just to respond to the criticism that Newcastle fans were giving him about the fact that he wasn't spending enough. And it was fair criticism. Before this season, there wasn't enough being spent. So, when they got Steve McClaren, immediately that kind of went against everything that Ashley said in some respects. Yes, they spent about £80 million on players. But if you look at it this way, Newcastle at the time McClaren was appointed were working under a director of football system. Now, personally for me, as a Sunderland fan, I've seen the director of football system at our club for the previous 2 seasons prior to this one, and while it can work, I don't personally like the idea of a director of football system. While it can work, and while there's potential for it to work, you've got to have the director of football and the head coach and the whole board on the same page and working together to bring success to the particular club in question. In Sunderland's case, Gus Poyet and Lee Congerton didn't really have a very good relationship, and that was a big part, I think, in why Sunderland didn't achieve anything. Whereas Dick Advocaat, when he was here, look at the way that DeAndre Yedlin was signed. I've got nothing against Yedlin as a player, but when Lee Congerton signed him, Dick Advocaat had openly said he'd never heard of him, or had rarely seen anything of him at best. And I thought, hang on, you two are supposed to work together here to try and make sure that we get good players in to make sure we're not in a relegation battle. That's not a good sign. Now, Steve McClaren was brought in my opinion, just purely because he was free, he'd been sacked by Derby, and he was available. So no compensation straight away would have to have been paid. The 3 names that were mentioned predominantly when he was this week to replace McClaren were David Moyes, Brendan Rodgers and Rafa Benitez. They were certainly 3 of the biggest high-profile names mentioned. Now, all 3 of those managers had clubs at the time McClaren was brought in. David Moyes at Real Sociedad, Rafa Benitez at Real Madrid, and Brendan Rodgers at Liverpool. If Newcastle had got any one of those managers at that time, compensation would have had to have been paid to all of those clubs. Knowing what Newcastle were like, they probably wouldn't have done so. So they got McClaren just because he was available. Not to mention the fact that you had Lee Charnley and Graham Carr, amongst other board members. There was a director of football system effectively at Newcastle when McClaren went there. So all McClaren did was just the head coach. And he has a reputation of being a very good coach. So Newcastle might have thought, Bob's your uncle, let's get him. Free appointment. Director of football's going to get in the signings anyway. It's fine, we'll stay up. Now, when McClaren came in, admittedly, I did think Newcastle would be looking over their shoulders a little bit. But I think I went for them to finish 13th, in my opinion, actually. If I remember correctly. But I said he wasn't the person. He was not the person that was going to... obviously, at the time, I was happy as a Sunderland fan that they got McClaren. But I just didn't think they were... I didn't think they would achieve anything that the Newcastle fans should have. Success-wise, that Newcastle fans deserve to see. Now again, I'm predominantly a Sunderland fan. Now I firmly believe that Sunderland have every right as Newcastle to be a big club. Sunderland are a big club, and I'm getting a little bit annoyed that people don't recognise that. Sunderland are a Premier League club, should be a mid-table, and I mean comfortably mid-table Premier League club, and have a great fan base, which people conveniently forget to notice. Not everyone, obviously. But Newcastle in particular are a huge club. The only thing they've had on Sunderland in recent years is history. There's not really been that much, apart from one fifth-place finish for Newcastle in quarterfinals of the Europa League. There hasn't been much between the two sides. But Newcastle is certainly a big club. They should be top 10 Premier League every year, quite comfortably at least. I don't think Europe is where they should be. I think that's overachieving for them personally. But they certainly shouldn't be in relegation battles. Now, McLaren, a lot of the times he made excuses, well, what people say excuses about Newcastle's performances. Now, to be fair, you know, I've seen Newcastle play quite a few times. Well, obviously, I watched the derby. They battered us the first 45 minutes. I don't care if anyone says, oh, but it ended 3-0. No, the fact is, that was the best Newcastle had played in the last 6 derbies, by a comfortable distance. Who was that under? McLaren. You know, West Brom, West Brom and West Ham games. I watched the 2 home games, rather. I watched the pair of them. Newcastle dominated both of those games. And although West Brom didn't offer anything, West Ham are a decent side. So Newcastle obliterated them for the first 45 minutes. You don't do that if you're not a good team. So, with regards to Newcastle, though, with McLaren, it was never going to work out because I've heard that he's a good coach, but he's not a very good manager. So, look, at the end of the day, it's ruined my week. I wanted Steve McLaren to stay at Newcastle, but if I'm being brutally honest, I didn't see it happening. Like I've said before, and I think I said when we played Bournemouth actually, that Sunderland should be beating teams like the promoted clubs, Leicester, Bournemouth. Yes, Leicester, even at the top of the table. You know, Bournemouth, you know, the promoted clubs, but Bournemouth especially. That was a club that I think a lot of people would have targeted a win against at the start of the season. Newcastle shouldn't be getting outplayed and beaten comfortably at home by a team that was in the Championship last season. And that's no disrespect to Bournemouth, by the way, because they've done really well. As long as Sunderland stay up, please. I wanted Bournemouth to stay in the Premier League just as much, because they've done really well under Eddie Howe. But they shouldn't be beating Newcastle that comfortably. So at that point, I thought it was inevitable that McLaren was going to go. Obviously, since then, they brought in Rafa Benitez. Now, irrespective of what's happened in the past, there's a couple of points I want to point out. The first question, there's been a lot of arguments saying, oh, well, Benitez couldn't work with Ronaldo. What's he going to do with Newcastle's players? There's a big difference between Cristiano Ronaldo and the players at Newcastle. Cristiano Ronaldo, at the time that Rafa Benitez was at Real Madrid, had won Champions Leagues, La Ligas, the Premier League, Super Cup, etc. He's won numerous trophies throughout his career. He has got one of the biggest egos in the world. So I'm sorry, but anyone is going to find... Jose Mourinho, who is a very good manager, despite what happened at Chelsea this season, Jose Mourinho was a very good manager. He even fell out with Real Madrid's players. So I think that's more an issue with Ronaldo than Benitez himself. And the second point I want... I think he'll do well at Newcastle because Newcastle's players, in comparison to Ronaldo, haven't won anything. Or they haven't won anything, certainly in recent times. Benitez is going to go in... I think apparently he was appointed today, and he's already gone and had his first training session. So he's going to go in today and command the respect of that dressing room. A dressing room that, quite frankly, has got next to no leaders in that team. So Benitez is going to get organisation, grit, determination. That is what you need in a relegation battle. People could say Benitez hasn't managed in the relegation battle before, but, you know, Paulo Di Canio hadn't in the Premier League, and Benitez is a better manager than Di Canio. So... You know, I obviously I was upset when Benitez was appointed because I don't want to play. I hate playing the derbies because even though we've won the last 6, only 2 of them at very best have I enjoyed watching. Ideally, I wanted Sunderland to get through this derby coming up next week to either draw it or win it. Newcastle, Norwich and Villa to go down and Sunderland to stay up. That's what I wanted. If I'm being honest now, I struggle to see Newcastle going down now with Benitez. It could still happen, obviously. Please do, but. I'd struggle to see them going down. And whatever people are going to say, Benitez's new manager impact at Newcastle, it is going to have an impact. And even though Newcastle's defence is still quite frail, Sunderland have had worse players. Say when Di Canio or Advocat came in, and Poyet even to a lesser extent, than what Benitez has got now. Because Newcastle have got some very good attacking players. The only thing I would say is, have they got enough attacking players to go and outscore opponents? Teams are going to go at Newcastle because the defence isn't that good. And it's got mental weakness. It's mental fragility at the minute. So they need to outscore a lot of opponents. Now, they've got Leicester coming up. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Newcastle went there and got a draw. And a draw at Leicester, given the way they've been this season, has been a very good result for Newcastle. Next game, though, Isn't it quite funny? If Newcastle lose their first game against Leicester, same to what Sunderland have done the previous 4 times that they've had a new manager come in. Newcastle, the derby be their second game and they've won it. Sorry, I said I'd done the praying, but here's another bit. Please do not let that happen, Sunderland. Please get something out of Newcastle away. At least a point or 3 will do me. Anyway, I would definitely take a point in the derby now. Because whatever people are going to say, St James's Park is going to be buzzing and rocking ahead of that derby. Because if McLaren had still been there, it could have affected the game in a large portion, because Sunderland would have gone to Newcastle, kept the crowd quiet for the first 20-30 minutes and frustrate them. Then the crowd would get on their back. Now, even if we still did that, which I expect us to do, by the way, even if we still did that, Newcastle's fans are going to be behind Benitez, behind the players, and you could say, oh, home crowds are difficult, blah, blah, blah. Derbies are different. Last season, we lost 4-0 at home to Aston Villa, and the crowd, you could see, turned on the players, because we see they weren't trying, but the next game, against Newcastle at home, the atmosphere was completely different. I expect the atmosphere to be very good at St James's Park. So, final thoughts on this. Benitez, I think, if Newcastle stay up, I think they'll do wonders for the next few years, because they have got a really good manager at the helm, especially one with a good pedigree generally in his career. I just hope they go down and we stay up, and that we don't lose the derby. I really hope that's the case. But we'll just have to see. Anyway, guys, look, like, comment, subscribe below. That was also just my thoughts on Newcastle. Like I said, I think they underachieve. I think both Newcastle and Sunderland underachieve. But if Newcastle do stay up, I think they'll do wonders. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But anyway, guys, like I said, like, comment, and subscribe. And let me know what you think. Do you think that this is going to how's this going to affect the relegation battle? Do you think Newcastle will stay up? Do you think Sunderland will go down? Or do you think Newcastle will still go down? Hopefully with Norwich and Villa, and Sunderland will stay up. Comment whatever you like to say. Sorry about that, below. And I will see you in the next couple of videos for the Time We're Derby. I'm absolutely bricking it now, honestly.